Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hyun Koo. I'm a partner at March Capital, where I lead our vertical AI strategy. Thank you for joining us for this phenomenal panel. There's been a lot of excitement around AI's potential impact, particularly in verticals that have seen limited innovation in the past. But there's a lot of questions that remain unanswered, like what's different now, what is hype, what is not, what does the opportunity set looks like. I'm excited to be here with four exceptional entrepreneurs in healthcare, legal, dental, and supply chain to talk through these questions. And maybe to start off, I'd like to just go around the room with an introduction and what is it that you're building and what is the problem that you're solving, maybe starting with Eleanor.
Hi everyone, I'm Eleanor, and I'm CEO of Luminance. So we've built our own specialized legal large language model, and we'll talk about why that's important a bit later on, that essentially can augment and automate the entire contract lifecycle. So if you think about when you're creating a contract, when you're reviewing a contract and negotiating a contract, or when you're trying to find things in your contract, our AI will expedite that. And it helps to reduce costs, it helps to drive efficiencies, it helps to retain institutional knowledge. And the problem that we're trying to solve is there is so much data being created on a daily basis that AI needs to help get through that. Second, it's very expensive because all the work that we're doing at the moment, well, most of it is very repetitive and manual, and AI can really transform that work.
Hi, my name is Varda. I'm the CEO of Overjet. Overjet is an AI company focused on dentistry. We analyze dental x-rays, notes, the same way as dentists do it, but we actually quantify disease and help make treatment recommendations. We work with insurance companies to automate their claim processing, and then we work with dental practices to help them make better decisions and help them communicate much more effectively with their patients. My background is more from the technology side. I have worked in different areas and started Overjet because I changed my dentist and got a treatment plan which was very different than I had received before. And that got me very interested in dental diagnosis, and the more I learned, the more I got obsessed with the field where AI could actually play a big role in helping us move in the right direction.
My name is Puneet Soni, and I am the CEO of a company called Suki AI. Well, these days, every company has a name AI next to it. So, my background, I think the biggest public health crisis in this country that very few people talk about is doctor burnout. If you look at, most people here probably when they've gone to see a doctor, they see their doctors kind of sitting on their computers, typing, clicking boxes, checking things, etc. 88% of all doctors in this country do not recommend their own profession to their kids. An average doctor spends 2 to 3 hours a day doing this administrative work. And we have taken the biggest, best professional class in the country and converted them into data clerks, basically. So Suki is building a digital assistant for doctors. Think of it like a Siri, but for doctors. You use Suki to do clinical documentation. You use it to do coding, which is how doctors get paid. You ask questions, hey, what medications does Puneet take? What allergies does he have, etc. And all of these things basically reduce the administrative burden on doctors, makes healthcare more efficient, lets clinical care get better, and creates actually very significant increase in revenue because of the quality of the administrative work that's done. So that's what Suki does.
Hey everybody, my name is Evan Smith. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Altana. Think about Altana as Google Maps for the global supply chain. It's a continuously updating, dynamic, canonical, bottoms-up view of the world's physical economy. And we use artificial intelligence across a federated network of both publicly available data and non-public first-party data from the likes of global logistics providers, governments, enterprises, insurance providers. And we use AI to render this bottoms-up view in the form of a knowledge graph of all these connections of global business and the flows of goods between them. And then we use AI to generate insight on top of that map of the world on use cases that span national security, supply chain resilience, climate, procurement, global trade management, and more.
If we think about the top software companies, you think about Snowflake, CrowdStrike, Datadog, et cetera, which are all sort of horizontal platforms. And I think, why haven't there been much success in vertical software? You can talk about hard to digitize data, need for bespoke solutions, and the list, I'm sure, goes on and on. Maybe starting with you, Evan, specifically in the supply chain world, supply chain visibility world, talk to us about some of the challenges historically of why it was so difficult to build in the supply chain world, and why is it different now with innovations in AI?
Yeah, so in supply chain, typically it's been a bit of a back office function for business, and you get operators and practitioners who want specific tools for specific jobs, and they end up stitching these things together, and it looks like Frankenstein's monster of 1980s through 1990s through modern-ish software all trying to interoperate, and it doesn't really, and then things move to spreadsheet. In supply chain specifically, you've got a lot of small wins, no big wins. SAP maybe notwithstanding. So I think what's different now is that there's both a technology story and the world is just changing kind of story. So on the world is changing front, great power competition, the climate movement, COVID, and all the sort of resulting supply chain resiliency work. So like governments and boardrooms and investors and insurers are all waking up to the challenge and failure of this just-in-time, opaque, globalized supply chain. So that is to say that there's now, I think, wide open space for things like what we do, which is to come in with a new paradigm of how might you manage an entire value chain, an entire business ecosystem, and not just, where's my couch, where's my container in the warehouse, or in the yard on the way to the warehouse. So the short version of that is these big dislocations are creating an opportunity for a new category to merge. And then on the technology side, the challenge in supply chain is you have all these data interoperability challenges. System of record here, a little widget there, EDI, data transmission there. So how do these data sets come together and get harmonized and become actionable? And obviously, the breakthroughs in natural language processing and machine learning, or AI generally, are enabling that.
And what about you, Puneet? And I know you can talk about this for 45 minutes, so I'm going to limit it to a minute and a half. Specifically with clinical workflows, why has it been so hard to penetrate that area, and why has it been so hard to build?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you look, first of all, I think verticalized versus platform, if you look at healthcare, healthcare is a universe of its own. 20% of US GDP, 5 to 7% of almost every country in the world's GDP. The software that's used to actually run this is somewhat verticalized, but also like mini platforms of their own in terms of how they do things. They tend to be very monopolistic in terms of how they do. The data that sits in them are a little bit of garbage in, garbage out. It's very hard to actually really structure them properly. The people who are using these are highly sophisticated, but almost impossible to train. So therefore, it's not easy to actually get doctors to adopt software. They're set in the ways. If you know the clinical workflow of one doctor, you know this one doctor. That's it. It's not a replicable process. Sales cycles are insanely painful. I think it's probably true for almost all of us, but wow, it's really hard to actually sell. I guess I've convinced myself I shouldn't do this company at this point. But the point is, it is a very, very difficult problem, which is on gobs of unstructured data with workflows that are very complicated and personalized. Seems like exactly the kind of thing artificial intelligence can solve. And in some ways, the wave of AI technologies that you were talking about is exactly what will be needed to disrupt and build the next vertical software, not just in healthcare, but also in all the other sectors we are talking about. So this is, yes, all of those are problems, but AI is exactly why we think they can be overcome.
And digging deeper into what made this category attractive for you to build in, people oftentimes talk about founder market fit, and Puneet, you're not a doctor, and Warda, you're not a dental surgeon, and maybe to you, Warda, can you talk about what attracted specifically to build in the dental AI space?
Yeah, so for me, I like to solve problems that I understand or have felt the pain. Even previously, I worked in things that had impacted me in some way or the other, because once, if I feel the pain myself, I'm more passionate about the problem itself. But so I felt the pain, actually physically when I got drilled when I shouldn't have been drilled. But then when I started looking into dentistry, I sort of got obsessed with the industry itself, because first of all, it impacts almost every person in the world. It's one of the most common conditions that, or diseases that exist. And whether you're talking about the most people who can really afford care or people who can't afford care, there hasn't been a standard of care that is at the level that it needs to be. So it is something that can first impact everyone. You can actually improve it. Then there's a lot of societal impacts of this as well, whether a lot of people in the US don't have access to care even, or access to dental care. So there's a lot of problems that we can actually start to solve. Of course, start with where a lot of the money is, and we can get a lot of revenue quickly. But there is, if we look at our roadmap, we do plan to solve some of the areas where we can help improve even access to care, et cetera. So the problem was meaty enough for me to get involved in, and I'm still learning. The more I learn, the more interesting it gets. And also there is a lot of, it felt like an area that hadn't been explored much. For example, in dentistry, the data got digitized about 15 years ago. Even the data in the practice management systems was not in a way that people could query and get the information out. That meant even simple population health studies hadn't happened of whether, what conditions impact a certain population or other, or how can disease get impacted. Even if you look at some of the data, for example, CDC says 40% of the adult population in the US has periodontal disease. Where is that data coming from, et cetera. So there's a lot of big missing information and very fundamental work that we could do, and a lot of low-hanging fruit that we could tackle. So that got me interested in dentistry, and the more I learned, the more interesting it gets every day.
And Eleanor, for you, when we first met Luminance, we were very impressed with a domain-specific proprietary LLM that you guys had built. And I'm curious, why was it important to the legal space to have a very domain-specific LLM versus some general-purpose LLM? One, and what made this vertical specifically a good candidate for one?
Sure. OK, so this might be quite a British thing, but I'm going to use this analogy anyway. We've all been in that situation where we have sat next to someone at a dinner party, or I definitely have, where you think, God, this person's so interesting. And you think, they knew everything about everything. Good for them. And you get home and you're like, wait a second. I'm pretty sure half the things that they've said I don't necessarily know are true. Large language models are fantastic, and especially with generative AI, it does what it says on the tin. It is there to generate, and it's fantastic for so many different use cases. We all know that. But when you're working with lawyers and when you're working in the legal space, it's a totally different question that you have to solve for. You have to make sure that you're getting the answer accurate, OK? So if it doesn't matter for different applications if the AI is accurate 99 out of 100 times. But in legal, that 1 out of 100 times can be fatal, essentially. So for us, it was so important that we built our own large language models, large language model that had been built off of contracts from law firms and been verified by some of the best lawyers in the world. Because we all know that data is a rocket fuel to large language models, but having a very narrow, specialized one for legal is really, really key. So, and why is that key? Well, historically, in the legal space, there have been a lot of technologies that have come out who have promised the world, okay? They've promised silver bullets, but the reality is that they've been quite manual. A lot of people have had their fingers burnt, essentially, because every single time there's a new regulation, they have to manually update the contracts and the system. It's very time-consuming, it's very manual, and it's quite laborious. Whereas now, with specialized AI, you can show return on investment instantaneously. You can allow for lawyers to automate that low-level part of a negotiation. So think about your standard contracts, NDAs, sales agreements, MSAs. Get that off the lawyer's desk so they can actually focus on the business, the business ad and the value add. And then one step further, you should have a system that if you've got 1 million contracts, if you've got 2 million contracts, if you're looking for something within those contracts, you should be able to find it instantaneously. You shouldn't have to keep on hard coding it. And so those are some of the problems and why specialist and verticalized AI addresses them.
Yep. And each one of you sort of deals with specific nuances related to data, customer sets, go-to-market motion, and more. And I think you each have a very unique viewpoint on this. So I'd like to double-click on those. And maybe Puneet, starting with you. Healthcare is an interesting category where 4 to 5, maybe fewer EHRs sort of own the data. And so in a market like this, how do you turn data into a differentiation or an advantage? And what are some of the challenges that you've had to face as you're scaling Suki?
Yeah, it's interesting. You have 4 major electronic medical records in the country here: Epic, Cerner, Athena, Meditech. Between them, that's about 70 to 80% of most medical record systems in the country. Data is sort of not really owned by them completely. It's also owned by the underlying provider system. And then because based on a bunch of regulatory stuff, also owned by the actual user, who's actually whose data it is at the end of the day. Most of the data that's created in healthcare, unfortunately, is not very structured and is not very coherent. And so I use the word garbage in, garbage out. I really do mean it. Like when you look at some of the capture of data that happens in healthcare, it's not really well structured and useful. If you can build a workflow that actually can make people want to use a product, where it actually makes a big difference. For example, let's say you could make a doctor 50 to 75% more efficient, or increase their revenue per encounter by 24%, or do something where they actually go home a couple of hours earlier to do things. They will adopt that workflow. If they adopt that workflow, then the data that's created out of it, if it's very well structured, can be used to actually make, by the company, as long as they're making the core product experience better. So to me, ultimately, it ends up becoming a human problem. At the end of the day, there is a lot of different people who put their hand up and say, healthcare data is mine, or we have a monopoly. But at the end of the day, a workflow that actually can make sense to a clinician will create the kind of moat that will create the kind of data that then can be used to build more models that can go and solve more clinical problems at the end of the day. So a data strategy is ultimately a human experience strategy. If you can build something that people love, you will have the data you need to build more things that people love.
And Evan, for you, you're dealing with a completely different problem where a system of record and supply chain visibility really doesn't exist. And in a way, you are building one, but also, like you mentioned, dealing with public data, private data, inconsistent data. And so once you build that system of record, what kind of workflows or use cases are possible? I guess maybe fast forward 5 years, what is possible with the Altana platform?
So what we're doing is situating each of our customers in this shared universal map of the supply chain. And then we're showing them where their raw materials come from, how those are transformed into the intermediate products, how those are then built and sold, customer's customer, and so on. And so, to your point, we're creating a new system of record for the global multi-tier supply chain. And that's never been a real requirement because the whole world has been built around outsourcing. So like the idea that you would need to know and manage and do something with that information in the first place was, like, until the last 4 or 5 years, non-obvious. And so the bet we're making is that on top of that system of record, there's going to be a wide range of things that, in some cases, governments will make you do. So you're going to have to report on your carbon emissions. Most of your carbon emissions come from the supply chain itself. You're going to have to prove that there's no forced labor in your goods in order to import goods into the United States, and as of this morning, Europe too. Mm-hmm. There are going to be things that become newly possible, like in the insurance and supply chain finance space, where if you can be let's pick on insurance. If you as a client can have this kind of real-time visibility around all the business interruption events that cause operating losses, as factories shut down or floods or whatever, then why not have a parametric insurance cover? And parametric insurance depends on everybody agreeing on a shared set of facts and circumstances, right? These things are, the insured losses, this event happened, we're going to pay out. I think there's some really exciting possibilities around public-private partnership. And we're having some interesting conversations with border agencies around the world who use us as, the map for them to enforce the law. And then, we're also the map for like a Maersk or, some of the biggest brands and retailers in the world. So why can't we put them together and create a green lane, sort of like clear for customs going through the border? So I think these emergent use cases are the ones that excite me the most, where it's once everybody's in a system of record, when there is a common operating picture, then there's new ways of actually doing commerce around the world.
Mm-hmm. Maybe switching gears to go-to-market. When people think about different verticals, I mean, even let's take dental as an example. There are dental practices, small, medium, large. There are insurance companies, and you sell to all the above. So how do you build a go-to-market team or function, and how do you sort of stay focused? How do you figure out who to sell to really make the flywheel happen? Love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so so segmentation is important there. I think for us, how it kind of evolved was a lot of demand. Once we started with insurance companies, a few people, we were 5 people when we started. We got our first contract from Guardian Insurance, once we could prove to them that it actually worked, the word got across. RFPs started coming to us, and we started replying to the RFPs. We won almost every RFP that we participated in, and then it was naturally an evolution there around, then getting salespeople, et cetera. And then once we got our FDA clearance, that opened up the provider side for us. Now we could sell to providers, and with that, again, started off with a few companies. There is one of the advantages of also being in a vertical is that there's a lot of word of mouth that happens, and that helps in trying to serve different portions of the market, because we started off with the larger groups, but then we started seeing in our funnel a lot of smaller practices joining as well. A friend of a friend would hear or would learn about Overjet. So I think that helps. But then, for us, the second piece came, having segmenting it out and seeing what we will serve, what we won't serve. So for example, right now we don't serve small insurance companies. So we have segmented some areas out, but for areas that we can efficiently serve effectively, we've segmented them and we serve them.
And for you, Eleanor, you're selling to GCs at enterprises, but it's really a platform that could be used by every single stakeholder within an enterprise. Are there certain nuances that you have to deal with when the buyer persona and the user persona are different?
Absolutely. So every different user has a different use case and has a different want from the tool. I think not too dissimilar, but actually, we started with law firms, and we started with law firms because the data was key. But also something that we don't talk that much about is the fact that lawyers love to talk. And so if you get some of the best lawyers using the software first, then they will introduce us to their inside, or kind of to their partners. And so when we launched our corporate product and we were selling that directly to GCs, the fantastic thing was that our technology, in a sense, had almost already been validated because a lot of their outside counsel already used us. So that reduced the friction of our go-to-market in the first place. And then when you're selling to different departments, I'm very strict with the team. I say, we're selling to the GC, and that's really important. Let's keep focused. Let's not get distracted. And that's because the GC can knock on the CEO's door. Actually, that's changed. In the last 6 months, it's the CEO, CFO, COO knocking on the GC's door saying, what are we doing to implement legal tech? I'm reading about it on the news every single day. I'm being told that I can reduce my costs by 40%, or can automate a lot of this by 40%. What technologies are we looking at? So GC is really important, but also they can turn up, they can ask for budget, and they can show return on investment. But what we see is that as soon as we've sold into GCs in the legal department, and that's, the whole conversation is, how do we automate a lot of the repetitive work that you're doing? So let's get NDAs off of your plate, let's get MSAs off your plate, and then how do we help you identify things in your contracts faster? Then we start to expand out. And so the conversation that we have with the finance teams or the CFO teams, it's, oh, look, have you seen that there are weird payment terms here? Or have you seen that there are auto-renewals that you agreed to 10 years ago that you didn't even know existed? Like the financial teams love that. Then with employment teams, it's, okay, like how can we churn through employment contracts faster? Because you really shouldn't be looking at this, or you shouldn't be focusing and spending as much time on this. With procurement teams, it's, okay, you've agreed to these SLAs here with these suppliers. This is what the PO says, but are they actually delivering? So, the sense, Luminance really is a platform where computer meets contract. It's actually beyond that. It's where computer meets document. And so pretty much anyone in an organization probably will get value from it, because everyone, in a sense, contracts and documents codify the way that we do business. And so it kind of goes across the board.
And switching gears to competition and differentiation, we have the author of Play Bigger here today, Al Ramadan, who talks about how category kings typically soak up 76% of the market cap of the entire category. Puneet, I want to ask you this question because there's been a lot of challengers entering the voice dictation market in the last 3 to 5 years, who everyone sort of claims they do the same thing. And so how do you differentiate yourself to customers, investors, strategic partners, et cetera?
When you start a company and if nobody else is building in your space, you should be worried, at the end of the day. And, when I started, I thought I was a genius. I found this area that nobody's building an AI assistant for healthcare. And then now there's like 15 of them, and every 6 months a new one comes up. So first of all, that's good. It actually means that the market is very validated. Noise is okay. You have to ultimately understand what is the real metric that you actually move. At the end of the day, you can go out and make claims around financial impact. You can make claims around efficiency. You can make claims around logos that you've won and things. But the one place where you can't make a claim is adoption. If you have 100 people who actually use the product, how many of them actually use it on a weekly basis? What's the engagement rate? What is the take rate of the product? You cannot make a claim on that. You can come up with numbers, but at the end of the reality is reality. And so the only way we, Suki, distinguish ourselves is by saying that if you adopt us in any health system, then we will guarantee at least a 70% adoption across all doctors who are using the product. in SaaS in general, anything above 70% adoption, especially in healthcare, is either EHRs or emails. And so that's a very high adoption rate. That can only happen if the product works. We are very proud of that. And actually, just that adoption guarantee is enough to differentiate ourselves from almost anything else in the market.
Evan, again, very different story for you. In a way, you're creating your own category of supply chain visibility. What are you doing so that you're staying ahead so others can't catch up? Sort of any strategic decisions you're making along the way?
Raising a lot of money. So the visibility we're providing is across the entire value chain, as opposed to, what's in my warehouse or where's my, truck in transit. Those are traditional supply chain visibility. And the use cases that are popping up on that value chain visibility span point solutions around trade compliance, around sanctions, around supply chain risk, around procurement, and on and on and on. So our competitive positioning and our challenge is to build a product quickly enough on top of the data flywheel that we have underneath the business that can subsume enough of those use cases to keep enough of those proliferating competitors at bay. And then the other dynamic is you've got kind of the dinosaur systems and compliance and supplier management and some of the 1990s incumbents that are starting to turn their eye to this space. And our view is the data will win. So if you've won the data game and you keep executing, you can eventually sort of swallow categories / build a new category. But yeah, we've got to raise a lot of money and do serious work both at the government affairs level, at the marketing level, at the go-to-market level to position this thing as fundamentally different.
Eleanor, I wanted to come back to what you said 30 minutes ago when you were talking about LLMs and generative AI. And specifically for Luminance, you have various different products that are generative AI, like Ask Lumi, which is a ChatGPT-like function, auto negotiation. And so let's get people here excited, sort of what generative AI use cases going forward will be available, or can you sort of think about in the legal space beyond auto negotiation? And
I think auto negotiation should get everyone excited first and foremost. And I think talking about changing the way in which we're working and creating a whole new category, that is what auto negotiation is. It is it really dramatically changes the way in which humans negotiate contracts. The fact that you can have two AIs communicate with each other and come to an agreement. And look, I'm not talking about your multi-million-pound deal that you're negotiating, okay? I'm talking about very standard contracts for the time being. So for me, that's one of the things that I'm super excited for. But taking a step back, and the market's not quite ready to get there. And so one of the things that people are very comfortable with at the moment with generative AI is a sense that if you receive a contract that the lawyer's never seen before, all you have to do now is press a button and the AI will totally read it and change it to be more aligned with your playbooks. That, for me, is an absolute game changer. It saves up to 90% of time of reviewing contracts. That is fantastic. And then beyond that, blue sky thinkings. A hot topic at the moment, I think, for a lot of you is around memory. So how can we start creating memory? For us, that's a massive competitive advantage, isn't it? Because if our AI can be a legal expert with that business, God, that's fantastic. They don't need to sleep. They don't need to eat. They are there for life, you would hope. And then on the flip side, for our customers, that's also their competitive advantage because they know their business. And that's not going to change. And they'll grow with their business. So that's very much blue sky thinking. But that's what me and the team are really, really excited for.
Yeah, and Warda here studied autonomous robotics in Pakistan, has a master's and a PhD at MIT, and I think you have a thing or two to say about generative AI hype cycle, particularly in dental. What are your thoughts on where we are at in sort of the development and hype cycle, as well as the adoption cycle, maybe in dental and other areas of technology?
So I think there have been a lot of companies where it has really helped them. For us, it's been different in terms of especially working with insurance companies, where with the amount of fear that is created in the media, I think they're more. They want to understand that more, understand biases, understand other pieces of it. And I think so there is of course, there is a hype cycle as well, which is coming from the investors. It's coming from the LPs. It's coming from the amazing team members, et cetera, who are joining us, who are very excited about moving from different fields, from crypto and other fields that they ended up and now joining AI. So I think we are attracting a lot of really good talent and a lot of other pieces. But I think there is this almost this fear, and I think it's the fear is before the technology has gotten. Is that fearful? But there is a lot of fear, which is causing some of the risk-averse institutions to step back a little and say, hey, what does this look like? Will I get now summoned by the government? What will it look like for us? And then that's what it will be the state's involvement as well, which we're trying to help navigate them. And anytime a new bill is about to pass, there's a lot of confusion around that. So I think there's the good side to it. There is some of the disadvantages with the hype cycle and the media craze that has happened with the technology. But I think it is the interesting thing is the technology is real. And with or without the hype cycle, for at least for our customers, when they first saw our products, their jaws dropped. They were super excited about it, and we still see that with when we give demos for the first time, and they're just shocked with what technology can do. And I think it's still the early innings, and we are only getting more and more powerful in what we can do. So there's a lot of excitement in general of and how these technologies are going to help, especially these industries that haven't changed a lot in a significant amount of time, and the change is big enough that they're willing to change for it, where the value is so much. If you're seeing a 10x ROI, if you're seeing a 20x ROI, even if you have a risk-averse organization, they're willing to move and prioritize such a big change in their organization. So there's a lot to happen, but I think it has its pros and cons right now.
Yeah, and Puneet, if you sort of think about Epic, Cerner, Meditech, I mean, these are massive businesses within healthcare, but for some odd reason, there's a misconception that investors think about when they think about investing in vertical software that these can't be massive businesses. And so for you, how big of a business can you build with Suki? And I know maybe starting with voice dictation and sort of owning the clinical workflows, maybe talk a little bit about like what does the opportunity set look like for Suki?
Yeah, I mean, you all came to a financial conference, so I'll give you a pitch. Right? The greatest technology company, the most significant technology company in history is going to be in healthcare. It's going to be bigger than, e-commerce has Amazon and media has Netflix and search has Google and social networking has Meta. 20% of US GDP is healthcare. 5 to 7% of every country's GDP is healthcare. You need healthcare when you start, you need healthcare when you end. It's going to be, somebody is going to build a company that's going to dwarf all of these other companies in terms of scale and size in healthcare. Now, how will that happen? If you think about the technology shift that's underway right now, the last time there was a tech shift in US health system was in 2009 when the meaningful use thing was passed and then everybody started ramming electronic medical record down people's throats. Since then, there's been a lot of companies built, everybody kind of creating some efficiency and raising money and building companies, till about 23, 24 now, when there's a fundamental shift underway where in about the next 5 years, every health system across the entire country is going to have some kind of an AI assistant, assistive layer sitting on top of their their electronic medical record data, their patient experience, their clinical experience, guaranteed. So you're sitting here, the penetration of artificial intelligence and assistive AI agents, LLM-based infrastructure is probably at 0.1% in healthcare. Is gonna, I'm telling you, in the next 5 years, is gonna get to about 50, 60%. You can't even imagine the businesses that have to be built. There'll be businesses in clinical documentation, businesses in orders, businesses in coding, businesses in question and answer and data retrieval, patient experiences. I could speak for the next hour and could not get through all the businesses that have to be built in this space. This is the absolute tip of the iceberg. And the key is, ignore the hype cycle. The hype cycle is here. In about 6 months to 9 months, it will settle down. And the only ones who will be left are the ones who are serving customers. Whether it's AI or software probably doesn't even matter.
And I think we're coming up on time. So last question for you, Evan. Make your case for why a company's supply chain could be bigger than something in healthcare.
Oh, I have to beat you. It's got to be bigger.
Do it.
Putting one is something
The biggest
controversial.
company is going to be
Yeah, look, I'd say that when people say supply chain, it evokes like a back office function of moving stuff around the world. The way I've always thought about supply chain is that it's the fabric of the world's physical economy. And we're building a graph and a system of record and both a government network and a business network attached to that platform that can serve up a vast array of use cases, only a thin sliver of which involve like moving things around. Right, so it's financing, it's insurance, it's all the global compliance, it's managing borders, it's national security, frankly. So I see the opportunity set for what we're doing in shares of global GDP terms.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing your insights, and please join me in giving them a round of applause.